Okay, in a previous video, we talked about three themes of biology. We talked about evolution, expression of genetic information, and structure determined, the idea that structure determines function. In this video, we're going to talk about four other themes of biology. We're going to talk about emergent properties, the cell, energy flow and chemical cycling, and regulation. Remember, these are general themes of biology. No matter what field of biology you look at, you can see elements. You can see each one of these: regulation, evolution, genetic information. Okay, so let's go to emergent properties. Now, before I give you a concrete sort of how it relates to biology, I want to discuss emergent properties on a more sort of practical level here. What we have are two piles. We've got pile 1 here on the left, and we got pile 2 here on the right. Now, in each of these pictures, we have the exact same pieces. We got 2 tires here, we got 2 tires here. We got a seat here, we got a seat here. Okay? And yet, I think we both agree that pile number 1 is not rideable. You can't sit on this pile of parts and expect to be able to ride it. However, here in pile number 2, you've got this property. It's rideable. You can get on that and you can ride that bike. So the question is, this is a property, the rideability of the bike. Pile 1 doesn't have rideability. Pile 2, or picture 2 here, does have rideability. And so the question is, what is responsible for this property of rideability? If picture 1 here and picture 2 have all the exact same parts, what is the difference between the two? Why is 2 here rideable and 1 here not rideable? Okay, and the answer is organization, right? If you just have a bunch of parts mixed together, right, you're not going to have much. You're just going to have a bunch of parts mixed together. But once you organize those parts in very specific way, from that organization emerges very specific properties. In this case, rideability. Okay, and so rideability in this example is considered an emergent property, a property that emerges when you organize the pieces. So let's take a look here then at emergent properties as they apply to living things. So we have these levels of biological organization, and the simplest sort of level here are atoms. And yes, you have subatomic particles, but for the purposes of this course, let's just say atoms are the simplest component. Yeah. And then we have molecules. You organize a bunch of atoms together and you get molecules. You organize a bunch of molecules together, you get cells. You organize cells, you get tissues. You organize tissues, you get organs. You organize those organs and you get organisms. And at each step, because of this organization, because you're arranging atoms in specific ways, because you're arranging molecules in specific ways, you get these emergent properties. So the most important emergent property to us studying biology is the emergent property of life. And so the question is, where does the property of life emerge? And the answer is right here. When you organize the right type of molecules, proteins, and carbohydrates, and lipids, and nucleic acids, when you organize them in just the right way, you get more than just a group of molecules. You get life. You get cells. Okay, so life is an emergent property that emerges when you organize molecules into cells. Well, cells then are the most basic unit of life. And we're going to study cells in quite a bit of detail a little bit later in the course. But for now, what you need to know is that there are two flavors of cells. There are eukaryotic cells, and those are the cells that you will see in protists and plants and fungi and animals. And those are the cells like this right here. Those are the cells that have your membrane-bound organelles like a nucleus and like the endoplasmic reticulum and various other organelles, mitochondria, chloroplasts. Prokaryotic cells are the type of cells you see in bacteria and archaea. So here is a prokaryotic cell. Now, they are going to have a membrane and they are going to have DNA. However, they do not have membrane-bound organelles. Their DNA is just kind of floating in there. Okay, so that's the two major differences between these types. And again, we will see this in more detail later in the course. Next, energy flow and chemical cycling. So the way in which life interacts with its environment. What we have here is the carbon, right? Life is carbon-based. And all of these organic molecules that we organize to make life, to allow for life, right? All that carbon is here in these nice, big organic molecules like proteins and lipids and carbohydrates and nucleic acids. Now, we use these organic molecules to, of course, build components of the cell, but we also use them to break down in the mitochondria here in a process called cellular respiration to release energy that is saved in these ATP molecules. These are like cellular batteries, and we'll talk a lot about ATP later on in the course. Now, when we do this, what happens to the carbon in these organic molecules is they become carbon dioxide. So these have a lot of energy, and then when we break them down into CO2, that energy then is used to make ATP. Now, that CO2 can be recycled back into these complex organic molecules, but that requires energy. Okay? Taking CO2 and taking water and putting them together and making organic molecules is a very energy-intensive process. And ultimately, where life gets the energy to do this is from sunlight. So it's through a process called photosynthesis, where the energy from the sun is used to convert CO2 into these organic molecules. And so we have this, so that's how our chemical is cycling. Our carbon is cycling like this over and over and over again. Our energy, however, it starts at a source and then it ends, right? It doesn't cycle. So it starts at the source, at the sun, and it's used to make organic molecules, and then that energy is used to make ATP. When that ATP is used in the cell to do work, it's released as heat energy. Okay, it doesn't go back and feed back to the sun. Okay, so that's what we mean by energy flow. Flow, we have a source and we have a destination, and that's what we mean by chemical cycling. It's just a circle. It cycles over and over again. Okay, the last theme of biology that we will talk about is regulation. And in fact, life can almost be defined as regulated metabolism. The idea that things aren't constantly on or things and reactions aren't constantly off. So what we have here is a very abstract series of chemical reactions in which an initial precursor A is turned into an intermediate B, is turned into an intermediate C, is turned into a final product D. And at each step, these reactions are catalyzed by enzymes. Okay, without the enzymes, reactions don't occur. Now, there's one important form of regulation that happens quite often within cells, and it's called negative feedback inhibition. what it is a product of a series of reactions. In this case, let's say D. Okay, so D has some useful function within the cell. But in addition, D binds to enzyme 1 and inhibits it. Doesn't allow enzyme 1 to work anymore. So what happens is if the cell is no longer using D, if it doesn't need this product anymore, the concentration of D increases, and more of these D molecules are being bound to enzyme 1, and therefore it shuts down the production of more D. Okay, so now we're no longer making D. Well, maybe now, the cell used all of the D, it's used all of that D, and now we're running low again. Well, that means there's not much D in the cell anymore because it used it all. Therefore, there's not much D binding to enzyme 1, and now the pathway is turned on again. That's called negative feedback inhibition. Well, that was now 7 themes of biology between the previous video and this one here. Evolution, the expression of genetic information, the idea that structure determines function, emergent properties, the cell, energy flow and chemical cycling, and regulation. And we are going to see each one of these again when we go to cell biology, when we talk about genetics, when we talk about molecular biology. We'll constantly see these, and I'll try to draw your attention to them.